Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is R.S. Raghu, and with me is Manoj Singh Rana, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. India's national COVID-19 recovery rate further improves to 92.48%. Over 22 crore vaccine doses administered so far. Clinical trial of Bharat Biotech's Covaxin on children begins at AIIMS, Patna. Britain reports zero daily deaths from COVID-19 for the first time since last July. Labour veteran Isaac Herzog elected as Israel's 11th president. Special session of UN General Assembly against corruption begins in New York. And in the French Open, Alexander Zverev defeats Roman Safiuddin to sail into the third round. COVID-19, we appeal to our listeners not to lower their guard and stay safe and protected by following these 4 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, focus on hand and face hygiene, and get vaccinated. For providing COVID-related information and guidance to the people, national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075 are operational. And now the news in detail. India is witnessing a significant and sustained decline in active caseloads and fresh COVID cases. The daily recoveries continue to outnumber the daily new cases for the 20th consecutive day. The recovery rate has further improved to 92.48%. The Health and Family Welfare Ministry has said the active caseloads presently comprise 6.33% of the cumulative positive cases, and it is continuously declining. It added that this is the 9th consecutive day the daily positivity rate is less than 10% has been registered. Meanwhile, India has administered over 22 crore vaccine doses to the beneficiaries so far. The Health and Family Welfare Ministry has called it a landmark achievement in India's fight against COVID-19. Vaccination is a crucial pillar in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. The Union government is continuously engaged in accelerating the pace of vaccination drive in the country with the cooperation of states and union territories.
India's Health Minister Dr. Harshvardhan on Wednesday addressed the 149th session of the World Health Organization Executive Board meeting through video conference. Dr. Harshvardhan successfully completes his tenure as a chairperson of the Executive Board of the WHO today. The minister commended the World Health Organization for its steadfast support to all member states throughout the pandemic.
I commend the World Health Organization for its steadfast support to all member states throughout the pandemic, fully committed to the value of equity and the simple truth that no one is safe until all are safe. The Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator is the fastest, most coordinated and successful global collaboration in history to accelerate the development, production and equitable access to COVID-19 tests, treatments and vaccines.
Director General of WHO Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus congratulated Dr. Harshvardhan for his pivotal leadership to global health. Dr. Tedros also congratulated him for receiving the Special Director General's Award of the WHO. Appreciating his contribution towards tobacco control, he said that Dr. Harshvardhan has been instrumental in driving global efforts towards tobacco control. Meanwhile, the clinical trial of Bharat Biotech's Covaxin on children began at AIIMS, Patna. 15 kids who voluntarily turned up for the vaccine trial. All the volunteers had gone through the screening process such as the RT-PCR test, the antibody test and the general checkup prior to receiving their shots. After being administered 0.5 ml dose of intramuscular injection, the children aged between 12 to 18 were monitored for 2 hours. The second dose will be given after 4 weeks. During this period, their health will be closely monitored.
Now let us take a look at the coronavirus updates from around the world. Britain on Tuesday reported zero daily deaths from COVID-19 for the first time since last July. According to the latest government figures, 1,27,782 people in the UK have died within 28 days of a positive test since the start of the pandemic. According to reports, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, welcomed Tuesday's milestone as good news and suggested that Britain's vaccine rollout was clearly working. However, he also sounded a note of caution with coronavirus cases on the rise. Australia's city of Melbourne extended lockdown for another week on Wednesday. Australian authorities are attempting to stamp out a small spread of a variant referred to as Kappa under the new nomenclature of the various variants announced by the WHO. The World Health Organization, WHO, on Tuesday has approved the Sinovac COVID vaccine for emergency use listing. It is the second Chinese vaccine to make the list, after the shot from Sinopharm was approved in April. It means the two-dose vaccine can be used as a part of the COVAX program, which provides vaccines to low-income nations. Meanwhile, the European Union governments have added Japan to their small list of countries from which they will allow non-essential travel. Currently on the list are Australia, Israel, New Zealand, Rwanda, Singapore, South Korea and Thailand. And international flights to Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam are to resume 48 hours after a decision to suspend international arrivals was reversed. This is All India Radio giving you the news.
3 steps to stay protected and stay safe from COVID-19. Wear face mask, 2 gaz ki duri to maintain social distancing, maintain hand and face hygiene.
Welcome back to the World News. Labour veteran Itzhak Herzog has been elected as Israel's 11th president. Israel's parliament elected Herzog in a vote as opposition lawmakers were holding negotiations to form a coalition to end Prime Minister Netanyahu's 12 straight years in office. Herzog replaces President Reuven Rivlin, who was elected in 2014 to the largely ceremonial position decided by the Israeli parliament known as Knesset. Herzog will assume his position on the 9th of July. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the BRICS foreign ministers meeting held on Tuesday. In conversation are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the BRICS foreign ministers meet that was held yesterday. The foreign ministers of the BRICS nations, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, all attended the meeting and various important agreements and decisions were made. Ambassador Sajjanhar, the first thing that one notices about the BRICS foreign ministers meeting is the fact that all the nations focused on the response to the COVID-19 crisis and also in ensuring equitable access to vaccines during this process. How do you see this development and the BRICS cooperation during this COVID time?
Well, over the last 1 year or so that we have had the COVID-19 pandemic with us, I think all international meetings, whether they are intergovernmental or they are multilateral, I think the issue of dealing with the pandemic has taken the top billing as far as the discussions are concerned. And over the last 5 or 6 months, ever since we got the vaccines also, I think the issue of affordability and accessibility of vaccines has also come in for discussions wherever meetings have taken place. So I don't think it comes as a surprise that even here, that when the ministers are meeting, whether it is in their opening statements or in the media statement that has been issued, or even the statement on reform and strengthening of the multilateral system. In all these places, this occupies a very important and a very significant place. And it is also satisfying that the proposal that has been put forward by India and South Africa, that is for a temporary waiver on patents for COVID-19 vaccines, diagnostics, therapeutics, medicines, masks, etc., that has found acceptance and support by all the ministers. Of course, there is still a long way to go because we have seen the history of this proposal. It was put forward in October last year, but then After that, it did not make much progress. It got some life when the US President Joe Biden lent his support to the proposal. But still, we have seen that even at the G20 meeting some weeks ago, the European Union is still not fully convinced. After all, it's now a grouping of 27 countries. And so all of them have to be on board. But it is a matter of satisfaction that at least these 5 developing emerging market countries, they have put their full weight behind this proposal. So once it comes, it is discussed in detail at the WTO. I think we should be able to see some rapid forward movement.
Ambassador Sajjanar, we've also seen that this meeting took place against the backdrop of the India-China border standoff. And we've also seen China's aggressive and very dominating behavior in the neighborhood and also to some extent globally. We find that the BRICS nation grouping also reaffirmed the importance of territorial integrity and sovereignty of states and the need to resolve problems through peaceful means. How do you see this as an indirect messaging going out to China, and how significant is this statement by the BRICS nations?
Well, yes, you are right. For the last more than a year, we have now seen that there has been hostilities between India and China. It was, in fact, on the 5th of May last year that the first altercation between the two countries took place on the banks of Pangong Lake, as also in Sikkim. And it was on the 15th of June that we had the skirmishes in the Galwan Valley. So this has been a time of tension and stress as far as the two countries are concerned. But this was not reflected in any of the statements that were made. If I speak about the statement by the Chinese foreign minister, he did not refer to any of the contentious issues. He only spoke about the manner in which India is dealing with the second wave of coronavirus. And he said that China and all members of the BRICS are ready to support India in every way. As far as External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar is concerned, his statement, as you referred to just now, was very telling because he advocated for a fair, just, inclusive, equitable and representative multipolar international system. He said, which is based on international law and the UN Charter that recognizes the sovereign equality of all states and respects their territorial integrity. This was a message to the Chinese foreign minister, although not overtly, but implicitly. And he also mentioned that the disputes and problems between the countries should be resolved on the basis of dialogue and while upholding international law and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. So this was significant in terms of the exchange, and the messaging would definitely have gone to China, but this did not in any way adversely impact upon the very important and substantive declarations and statements that were brought out after the meeting of the ministers.
Ambassador Sajjanar, we also see that this is the first time that the BRICS foreign ministers agreed on a standalone joint statement on strengthening and reforming the multilateral system. They agreed that such reforms have to cover all key multilateral institutions, which include the UN and its organs such as the UN Security Council, the UN General Assembly, global financial institutions such as the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, even trading systems including WTO and the global health system, which has WHO at its very core. How significant, Ambassador Sajjanar, do you feel is the fact that one feels an urgency, and this is reflected in this joint statement of the BRICS nations, that the multilateral system that kind of puts checks and balances globally is outdated and is in desperate need of a reform? And realistically speaking, how much of a difference or a push does this provide for these multilateral reforms then?
Well, it is very significant that the BRICS foreign ministers decided to issue a separate joint statement on strengthening and reform of the multilateral system. Because we have seen over the last many years that the multilateral system is not operating to its potential. In fact, of course, the United Nations has many successes to its credit. But the situation that we see today, the multilateral system, its authority has been eroded, its credibility has been very significantly diluted. And in fact, that has been visible very much during the time of the pandemic, because you would recall that when the pandemic started at the beginning of last year, the multilateral system was nowhere to be seen. In fact, the UN Security Council could not even meet during the month of March when this pandemic was raging at its worst, because it was mentioned at that time by the then chair of the UN Security Council, China, that this was not a peace and security issue, but it's a health issue. So when the multilateral system really was required to be in position and to act, it was found missing. The next month when the UN Security Council met, still they could not come to any sort of agreement because of the differences and the altercations between the two main proponents, that is the United States and China. So multilateral system has not been effective, and Prime Minister Modi, in his comments last year on the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, had said that the United Nations, the multilateral system, has been found wanting because it does not reflect the realities of today. It is still working on the basis of instruments that were devised and designed 75 years ago, when the situation was very different. At that time, when the United Nations started, we had only 53 members. Today, there are more than 190 members of the United Nations. And still, the structure of the UN Security Council has not changed. So obviously, it is not designed to deal with effectively with the challenges that the world faces today. So Prime Minister Modi has been speaking about it. Other world leaders have been speaking about a reformed and a strengthened multilateral system. And I think this joint declaration, joint statement that has been issued by the ministers is a recognition of this fact. And it speaks about, as you said very rightly, that the United Nations Security Council, General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, as well as the financial organs and instruments like IMF, World Bank, other agencies, WTO, WHO. It speaks about the reform of all these organs and agencies. Now, to respond to your question whether this will be effective, I think this will have some contribution to make to push towards reform of the multilateral trading system, multilateral system per se. But I don't think it's going to have a very significant impact, because if you look at the expansion of the UN Security Council, it is basically China which has been standing in the way of its expansion. Starting from 2015 and then again in 2017, we have a text on the basis of which negotiations could be conducted for an expansion of the UN Security Council, both in the permanent as well as in the non-permanent category. But it is always China that is putting obstacles, that is putting spokes on the way, creating obstructions, and we have not really been able to make much progress. And looking at China's behavior in the manner in which it has been acting, particularly over the last 1.5 years, ever since the virus first emerged from Wuhan in China, it does not appear to be very likely that China will change its views and start supporting negotiations on text to reform the system and to expand the UN Security Council.
Ambassador Sajanhar, we also see that in the joint statement, there is a reference to cross-border movement of terrorists, terror financing networks, and safe havens. The BRICS members also refer to the counterterrorism strategy adopted at the Groupings Summit last year and reiterated their commitment to finalize a result-oriented action plan by the Counterterrorism Working Group in 2021. Would one be correct in assuming that this hint or this reference then is to Pakistan? And this is a point that India has been making at various international forums, repeatedly urging the global community to realize the seriousness and the urgency of this issue.
You are right. This reference can definitely be taken to mean that it points towards Pakistan. But again, what we have seen as far as the behavior of China is concerned, that on this forum, it will say all that is required, because all this language is definitely a language that is used by India when we are talking about dealing with terrorism, countering terrorism, and particularly from Pakistan, which provides safe havens and provides state support and provides funding and training of the terrorists. So China agrees to all this very much, but immediately after this, it will go and address some other meeting or in a bilateral context, and it will also refer to the huge contributions that Pakistan has made towards dealing with the terrorism, towards battling terrorism, and what are the losses that it has suffered on its own. You would recall that in the BRICS summit that took place in 2017 in Xiamen in September, there we had mentioned about 10 terrorist groups, and they included groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Haqqani Group, Taliban, etc. All of these were mentioned, but just a few days after that, the Chinese foreign minister received his counterpart from Pakistan and was lauding the contribution of Pakistan in terms of fighting terrorism. So there is a lot of hypocrisy in what China says and what China does. There is a huge mismatch between the two of them. But still, I think this is useful. These statements are useful because when we are at other fora, for instance, if it is discussions in the Financial Action Task Force, if it is discussions with the United States, with the European Union, then definitely these are statements that can be brought to their attention to say that there is commonality of views and commonality of purpose in dealing with terrorism that emanates from Pakistan in our region.
With this, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
In Ladakh, the Tibetan people who moved to the region after the Chinese occupation of Tibet have been contributing to the local economic development. On the occasion of the Golden Jubilee year of AIR Leh, our correspondent has filed this report.
The Tibetan population residing in Ladakh region, besides leading a successful life for themselves, also contribute in the local economic development of the region. The Chief Representative Office of the Sonamling Tibetan Settlement, Leh Ladakh, CRO Mr. Chetan Angchuk, speaks about his community's role in economic sector of the region.
Tibetans in Ladakh, the overall population till now is 7,550. Regarding the livelihood, all the economic participation from Tibetans here in Ladakh, 40% nomadic life. Their livelihood is dependent on livestock, particularly those who are living in Changtang areas. And in Leh area, the majority of the Tibetans, they are doing business like garments, small antique shops, and showrooms, the mobile shops. Around 15% are their laborers.
The peace-loving Tibetan people under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama always believes India as their second home, and they continuously try to contribute to the society they live. With Ramesh Chandra, this is Phuntsog Wangmo reporting from Leh Ladakh.
The special session of the General Assembly on challenges and measures to prevent and combat corruption and strengthen international cooperation is being held from the 2nd to the 4th of June 2021 at the United Nations headquarters in New York. In a statement, the UN said that the special session will provide an opportunity to galvanize the political will of governments and the international community as a whole in advancing the fight against corruption. The G7 countries signed a joint statement ahead of a special session of the UN General Assembly against corruption.
The Sensex today ended marginally down and Nifty closed almost flat amid mixed global cues. The rupee weakened 19 paise against the US dollar. A report from the business world.
The Sensex at the Bombay Stock Exchange slipped 85 points, or 0.16% to finish at 51,849. The Nifty at the National Stock Exchange added 1 point to remain almost unchanged at 15,576. In the global equity markets, Asian shares traded mixed. Japan's Nikkei 225 climbed 0.5%, and South Korea's Kospi added 0.1%. On the other hand, Singapore's Straits Times and China Shanghai Composite Index both declined 0.8%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng fell 0.6%. European shares are marginally up in intraday trade. Oil prices rose, supported by an OPEC Plus decision to stick to its plan to restore supply to the market gradually and by the slower pace of nuclear talks between Iran and the US. In intraday trade, Brent crude prices were trading around $71.10 per barrel. Back home, gold prices gained 80 rupees amid rupee weakening even as gold prices fell in the international bullion markets. At the multi-commodity exchange, gold was trading at 49,075 rupees per 10 grams. Silver prices, however, declined 160 rupees to trade at 72,090 rupees per kilogram when reports last came in. And in the foreign exchange market, the rupee weakened by 19 paise to finish at 73 rupees and 9 paise against the US dollar. Arjun Chaudhary for World News, All India Radio.
U.S. President Joe Biden visited the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma on Tuesday to mark the centennial anniversary of the Tulsa massacre. Mr. Biden tweeted that 100 years ago, the thriving black community of Greenwood in Tulsa, Oklahoma was ruthlessly attacked by a white supremacist mob. As many as 300 black Americans were killed and 10,000 were left homeless. The massacre is one of the deadliest events of racist violence in the country's history. Visiting the Greenwood Cultural Center and meeting with survivors, Mr. Biden said that only through remembrance would the wounds be healed.
For much too long, the history of what took place here was told in silence, cloaked in darkness. But just because history is silent, it doesn't mean that it did not take place. And while darkness can hide much, it erases nothing.
Moving on to sports now. In men's singles in the French Open tennis, Kei Nishikori of Japan defeated 23rd seed Russian Karen Khachanov in a marathon match which lasted for 4 hours. In his second 4-hour match in a week, the Japanese registered a grueling 4-6, 6-2, 2-6, 6-4, 6-4 triumph over the Russian in a second-round match. Earlier, Alexander Zverev sailed through to the third round of men's singles, defeating Russian Roman Safiullin in straight sets. The German 6th seed secured a 7-6, 6-3, 7-6 victory. In women's singles, Czech number 20 seed and 2019 Roland Garros finalist Marketa Vondrousova defeated French wildcard Harmony Tan 6-1, 6-3 to enter the third round. In football, Carlo Ancelotti has returned to Real Madrid for a second spell as a manager on Tuesday. Mr. Ancelotti rejoins the club from Everton. In cricket, both the men's and women's Indian cricket teams are leaving for the UK today and are scheduled to reach London tomorrow on a charter flight. Virat Kohli's team will be playing 6 tests in England from June the 18th, while the women's test side will face the host in a one-off match before playing 6 white ball games. The Indian men's contingent will be in the UK till September the 14th. They will face New Zealand in the ICC World Test Championship final in Southampton starting June the 18th, before facing England in a series of 5 tests from August the 4th. The first test between England and New Zealand at the Lords, New Zealand were 85-1 at lunch. The Kiwis have returned to the Lords for the first time after the 2019 World Cup final, and it is also the first test being played at Lords since the 2019 Ashes.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in foreign press. Washington Post writes that Sri Lanka is facing one of the worst environmental crises in its history as tons of potentially toxic debris from a fire aboard a container ship blanket is burning miles of its coastline. New York Times carried the headline that many countries have been hit by shortages of key goods as the pandemic upended global supply chains. And now a quick look at the headlines once again. India's national COVID-19 recovery rate further improves to 92.48% over 22 crore vaccine doses administered so far. Clinical trial of Bharat Biotech's co-vaccine on children begins at AIIMS, Patna. Britain reports zero daily deaths from COVID-19 for the first time since last July. Labour veteran Isaac Herzog elected as Israel's 11th president. Special session of UN General Assembly against corruption begins in New York. And in the French Open, Alexander Zverev defeats Roman Safiullin to sail into the third round of men's singles. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from Finland.
Vaishnav Janato Tene kahiye pir parai jani re para tu ke upakar kare
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.